I hadn't even touched my wine when my brother stood up to toast his new condo. The problem was, I paid over $300,000 for that place, and the deed was in my name. My mother smiled like this was normal, but right as he started his speech, my phone buzzed. It was the title company, and the woman on the line asked a question that made the entire table go silent. My name is Faith Stewart, and up until 20 minutes ago, I thought I was simply attending a celebratory dinner. I am 33 years old, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I had finally planted my feet on solid ground. I had just closed on a beautiful condo in the south end of Charlotte, a place with exposed brick, tall windows, and a view of the city skyline that reminded me I had made it. I had spent the last decade climbing the corporate ladder in risk management, saving every spare dollar, driving a car that was 10 years old, and eating packed lunches while my peers went out, all so I could sign my name on that deed. The dinner table at my mother's house was set with her good china, the plates with the gold rims that only came out for Christmas or significant life events. My father, Roy, was carving the roast chicken with the intense concentration of a surgeon, mostly to avoid making eye contact with anyone. My mother, Linda, was beaming, her face flushed with a mixture of wine and performative maternal pride. Across from me sat my older brother, Graham, and his new girlfriend, Kylie, a girl who looked sweet but seemed perpetually confused by the dynamics of our family. I had barely lifted my fork to take a bite of the green beans when Graham cleared his throat. It was a sound I knew well. It was the sound of a curtain rising. It was the sound of a show about to begin. Graham stood up, holding his wine glass by the stem, swirling the cheap Merlot my mother had poured as if it were a vintage Bordeaux. He smiled at the table, that dazzling, charming smile that had gotten him out of speeding tickets and into loans he never intended to pay back. "I would like to propose a toast," Graham said, his voice smooth, projecting to the back of the room. "To new beginnings, and to the new condo, it is a huge step for the family," I smiled, raising my glass. "Thanks, Graham. I really appreciate that." Graham's smile didn't waver, but his eyes shifted. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Kylie, then at Mom. "Oh, Faith, you don't need to thank me. I'm just glad we could make this work. I know it is a lot of paperwork for you to handle, but once my credit score is back up to 700, we will get your name off the title and put mine on. Just like we planned." The glass stopped halfway to my mouth. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. The air conditioner hummed in the background, a low drone that suddenly felt deafening. I looked at my brother. He wasn't joking. He looked entirely serious. Benevolent even, as if he were the one doing me the favor. "Excuse me," I said, my voice quiet. "The condo," Graham said, taking a sip of his wine. "I was telling Kylie how great you have been about this whole thing. Not every sister would leverage her credit history to help her brother get a property. I mean, obviously, I will be making the mortgage payments. But your name being on the loan for now, it is a lifesaver." I set my glass down. I set it down hard enough that wine sloshed over the rim and stained the white tablecloth red. "Graham," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice, "I bought that condo. Me. I put 20% down. That is $60,000 of my own money. The mortgage is in my name. The deed is in my name. There is no we. There is no plan to transfer it to you," Graham laughed, a dismissive, brotherly chuckle. He reached over and patted my hand, which was clenched into a fist on the table. "Faith, come on. Don't be dramatic in front of Kylie. We talked about this. My bankruptcy is only 2 years old. I couldn't qualify for the prime rate. You are just holding the title. It is a standard family arrangement." I pulled my hand away as if he had burned me. I looked at my father. "Dad, are you hearing this?" Roy kept carving the chicken. He was slicing it into pieces so thin they were almost transparent. He did not look up. I looked at my mother. "Mom," Linda sighed, putting her fork down. She looked at me with a disappointed expression, the kind she reserved for when I wasn't being cooperative. "Faith, honey," she said, her voice dripping with reasonable-sounding poison, Don't ruin dinner. You know how hard your brother has been working to get back on his feet. He needs a stable address to launch his new consulting business. You have your apartment. You are single. You don't need a 2-bedroom in South End. You are just helping him out. Since you are the sister, it is the right thing to do. Helping him out? I repeated, my voice rising. Mom, I am not renting it to him. I am not letting him crash on the couch. He is talking about ownership. He is claiming my property is his. It is just paper. Faith, Graham interjected, his voice hardening slightly. Why are you being so selfish? I found the listing. I told you about the building. You told me the building existed, I snapped. I went to the showing. I hired the inspector. I wired the money from my savings account, the account I have been building for 8 years. Details. Graham waved his hand. The point is, the intent was always for me to take over. I have already told my investors that I have secured a prime location for my home office. Investors. I let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. Graham, you don't have investors. You have gambling debts and a car payment you are 3 months behind on. Hey. Graham slammed his hand on the table. The silverware rattled. That is enough. You don't know what I have, and you don't get to embarrass me in my house. This is Mom's house, I corrected him, and the condo is my house, mine. If you think for 1 second that I'm going to sign over a $300,000 asset to you because you feel entitled to it, you are out of your mind. Graham stared at me. The charm was gone. His eyes were cold, calculating. He reached into the inner pocket of his blazer. For a second, I thought he was going to pull out a weapon, but he pulled out his smartphone instead. He tapped the screen a few times and then shoved the phone across the table toward me. You really want to play this game? Faith, you want to play the legal eagle? He sneered. Look at that. I looked down at the screen. It was a photo of a document. It was a quitclaim deed. I recognized the format immediately. In my line of work, I reviewed compliance documents all day. I knew what a transfer of deed looked like. I saw the legal description of the property, my condo. I saw the grantor name Faith Stewart. I saw the grantee name Graham Stewart. And at the bottom, I saw a signature. It was my name. It was looped and slanted, bearing a frightening resemblance to the way I signed my checks. What is this? I whispered. The blood was draining from my face, leaving me cold. That, Graham said, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms, is the document we are going to file, or rather, the copy of the one that is already in the process. Mom said it was okay. She said we needed to streamline things. I looked at my mother. She was busy buttering a roll, refusing to meet my gaze. It is just to keep things fair. Faith, she mumbled. Graham needs assets to show stability. You can always buy another one later. You forged my signature. I looked back at Graham. That is a felony, Graham. That is not a family dispute. That is a crime. It is not forgery if the family agrees, Graham shouted. And I didn't forge it. You signed it. Maybe you forgot. You were tired. You signed a bunch of papers when you came over last week to help Mom with her computer. I signed a birthday card for Aunt Sarah, I shouted back. I did not sign a deed. Kylie looked terrified. She was shrinking into her chair, looking from Graham to me. Graham, you told me you bought the place, she whispered. I did buy it, babe. Faith is just being hysterical because she wants a cut of the equity, Graham said, not breaking eye contact with me. The atmosphere in the room had shifted entirely. The warmth of the roast chicken dinner had evaporated, replaced by the sterile, freezing tension of a courtroom. I wasn't a sister anymore. I was a defendant, and Graham was the prosecutor, judge, and jury, with our mother as the bailiff. I stood up. My legs felt shaky. I am leaving, and tomorrow morning, I am calling my lawyer. If that document has been filed, Graham, I swear to God I will. My sentence was cut off by a sound from my purse. My phone was vibrating against the hardwood floor where I had set my bag. It was a long, sustained vibration. I ignored it. I am going to the police, I said. Sit down. Faith, my father said softly. It was the first time he had spoken. Let's not get the police involved. We can work this out. There is no working this out. Dad, he is stealing my house. My phone buzzed again, and again. It was persistent. I reached down and grabbed it, intending to silence it so I could finish screaming at my family, but when I looked at the screen, I froze. The caller ID didn't show a name from my contacts. It said, Harbor Point Title Fraud Review. My heart stopped. Harbor Point was the company I had used for my closing 3 weeks ago. I looked at Graham. He was smirking, taking a sip of wine, confident that his gaslighting was working, confident that Dad would make me back down, confident that I would fold like I always did to keep the peace. I hit the answer button. Faith, don't answer that, Mom said sharply. We are talking. I hit the speakerphone button and set the phone in the center of the table, right next to the gravy boat. This is Faith, I said, my voice trembling with adrenaline. The room went silent. Graham paused with his glass halfway to his mouth. A woman's voice filled the dining room. It was professional, crisp, and laced with an urgency that cut through the humidity of the room. Ms. Stewart. This is Sarah Jenkins from the Fraud Division at Harbor Point Title. I am so sorry to interrupt your evening, but we have a critical situation regarding your property at the South End address. I stared at Graham. His smirk faltered. I am listening, I said. Ms. Stewart, the woman continued. We just received an alert from the county recorder's office regarding a pending filing on your property. We flagged it immediately because the notary stamp used on the document belongs to a commission that was revoked 6 months ago. Graham's face went white. The color drained out of him so fast, it looked like a magic trick. A revoked notary, I repeated, keeping my eyes locked on my brother. Yes, ma'am, the woman on the phone said. But that is not the only issue. We are looking at a quitclaim deed attempt. Ms. Stewart, I need to ask you a very serious question, and I need you to answer clearly. Are you currently in the process of transferring your property to a Graham Stewart? Did you sign any documents to that effect in the last 48 hours? No, I said clearly. I did not. Okay, the woman said. Her tone shifted from inquiry to action. Then you need to know that we have reason to believe this is an active attempt at title theft. The document was submitted electronically 20 minutes ago. We have already placed a freeze on the transaction, but she paused, and the silence in the dining room was heavy enough to crush a lung. But what? I asked. Ms. Stewart, the user who uploaded the documents used an account linked to a social security number that is very similar to yours, but with 2 digits transposed. We also have the IP address of the upload. It is coming from a residential internet connection registered to a Linda Vaughn. My mother dropped her butter knife. It clattered loudly against her porcelain plate. The woman on the phone delivered the final blow. We are preparing to hand this file over to the State Financial Crimes Unit. If this was not you, Ms. Stewart, we are looking at a felony fraud case involving immediate family members. Do you want us to proceed with the police report? I looked at Graham. He wasn't moving. He wasn't drinking his wine. He looked like a man who had just realized the floor he was standing on was made of glass, and it was beginning to crack. To understand why my brother sat across from me at that dinner table with the absolute conviction that he was entitled to my property, you cannot just look at the events of the last 3 weeks. You have to look at the last 30 years. You have to go back to a split-level house in Greenville, South Carolina, where the family mythology was written in permanent ink before I was even old enough to read it. In the Stewart household, Graham was not just a child. He was an event. He was the firstborn, the son, the carrier of the name. He was charismatic in a way that felt chemical. When he walked into a room, the energy shifted toward him like water draining toward a low point. He was the pitcher on the varsity baseball team who could throw a fastball at 80 miles per hour, but could not remember to take out the trash. He was the boy who smiled his way out of detention and charmed the neighbors into forgiving him when he drove his dirt bike through their flower beds. I was different. I was Faith. The name itself felt like a command to just believe in the process and stay quiet. I was the child who was fine. That was the label that stuck to me like a price tag on a clearance item. Faith is fine. Faith is steady. Faith can handle it. While Graham was the star of the show, I was the stagehand who made sure the props were in the right place. I remember being 16 years old, sitting at the kitchen table late at night, filling out my own permission slips and forging my mother's signature because she was too busy helping Graham edit his college application essay for the 4th time. It wasn't that she didn't love me, I knew she did. But her love for me was a passive thing, a warm background radiation. Her love for Graham was an active, consuming fire that required constant fuel. My mother, Linda, had a phrase she used whenever I pointed out the disparity. It usually happened after Graham got something expensive, like a new set of golf clubs or a tutor for a class he was failing, while I was told we didn't have the budget for the art camp I wanted. "Faith, honey," she would say, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Graham needs a little extra help to shine. The world is hard on sensitive boys like him, but you are strong. You are like a little tank. You always figure it out." She said it like it was a compliment. She framed my neglect as a superpower. For years, I believed her. I thought my ability to endure disappointment without making a sound was a virtue, not a trauma response. I learned early on that if I had a problem, I had to solve it, because bringing it to my parents only resulted in a distracted nod or a suggestion that I was being too demanding. My father, Roy, was no better. Though his negligence was quieter, he was a man who hated conflict the way a cat hates water. He loved us, I think, but he loved his peace of mind more. When the dynamic between Mom and Graham got too intense when Graham was demanding money, or Mom was hysterically defending him, Dad would simply vanish. He would retreat to his workshop in the garage or stay late at the office. He abdicated the role of captain, leaving Mom to steer the ship wherever Graham wanted to go. He taught me that men were not safety. They were just another variable you had to work around. When it came time for college, the difference in our trajectories became a canyon. Graham was sent to a private university 2 states away with a full meal plan and a debit card linked to my parents' checking account. He switched majors 3 times, joined a fraternity that cost $2,000 a semester, and eventually dropped out because he felt the professors didn't get his vision. I went to the state university. I filled out my own FAFSA financial aid forms. I applied for 3 scholarships and got 2 of them. I worked 20 hours a week as a waitress at a 24-hour diner, serving eggs and grits to truckers at 3 in the morning to pay for my textbooks. I remember the smell of grease in my hair and the ache in my lower back, and I remember feeling a strange, cold pride. I didn't owe anyone anything. Every grade I got, every dollar I saved, it was mine. There was a moment during my junior year that solidified my resolve. I had called home, desperate because my car, a rusted sedan I had bought for $1,500, had blown a transmission. I needed $600 to fix it so I could get to work. Mom sighed into the phone. "Oh, Faith, timing is just terrible. We just had to bail Graham out. He got a DUI in Charleston, and the lawyer fees are astronomical. We are tapped out. Can you pick up extra shifts?" I stared at the phone. My brother had committed a crime and received a check. I had a mechanical failure and received a lecture on budgeting. "Okay, Mom," I said. "I will figure it out." "I knew you would," she said, relieved. "You are so resilient." That was the day I stopped asking. I walked 3 miles to work for a month until I fixed the car. I graduated with honors, landed an entry-level job in a bank, and started climbing. I moved into the world of risk management and compliance. It was a perfect fit for me. My job was to look at systems, identify the weak points, predict where the fraud would happen, and build walls to stop it. I was good at it because I had spent my whole life watching my family operate without any controls. While I was building a career, Graham was building a house of cards. He moved back home. He moved out. He moved back home again. He had a dozen startup ideas that were going to revolutionize the industry. There was the app for dog walkers that never launched. There was the custom t-shirt business that left the garage full of unsold inventory. There was the day trading phase where he lost $5,000 of Dad's retirement money in a single afternoon. Each time he failed, he had a story, It was the market. It was his business partner. It was bad luck. And each time, Mom was there with the checkbook, nodding sympathetically, telling him that geniuses are often misunderstood. She was not just enabling him, she was crippling him. She was teaching him that consequences were things that happened to other people. I watched all of this from a safe distance. I lived in a small rental apartment. I drove my paid-off car. I invested in my 401k. I created a life that was hermetically sealed from the chaos of the Stewart family finances. I loved them, but I treated them like radioactive material, safe to look at from behind lead glass, but dangerous to touch. The decision to buy the condo in South End was the culmination of 10 years of this discipline. I didn't buy it to show off. I didn't buy it to host parties or to impress a boyfriend. I bought it because I wanted a physical manifestation of my boundaries. I wanted 4 walls that I owned. I wanted a front door that only opened when I turned the key. I wanted a deed recorded in the county courthouse that said, Faith Stewart, and nobody else. It was supposed to be my sanctuary. It was supposed to be the one place on earth where I did not have to be strong or resilient or understanding. It was just supposed to be mine. When I finally told my mother I was closing on the place, I should have recognized the tone in her voice. It wasn't happiness for me. It was calculation. South End, she had asked? That is a very trendy area. Graham was just saying he needs to be closer to the city center for his networking. My stomach had tightened, a reflex honed over decades. It is a 1-bedroom, Mom. It is small. Well, you know, she had said vaguely. Family helps family. I had ignored the red flag. I thought I was safe because I had the law on my side. I thought that because I was an adult woman with a 6-figure salary and an excellent credit score, the dynamic of the nursery no longer applied. I thought I had outrun the shadow of being the backup child, but sitting at that dinner table, watching Graham smirk while the woman from the title company explained that a felonious attempt had been made to steal my sanctuary, I realized I was wrong. I hadn't outrun anything. My brother didn't see me as a separate person with property rights. He saw me as he always had, as a resource to be harvested. I was the savings account he hadn't opened yet. I was the safety net he hadn't used yet. And my mother didn't see a crime. She saw a solution to Graham's latest problem. The anger that rose in my chest wasn't hot and explosive. It was cold and ancient. It was the accumulated interest on 30 years of silence. I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and I realized that the time for being the strong one who absorbed the blow was over. I had spent my life building a fortress to keep the world out, never realizing that the real invasion would come from the people who had keys to the front gate. But as the reality of what they had done settled in, one thing became crystal clear. They had made a fatal error. They thought they were dealing with the 16-year-old girl who would walk 3 miles to work to avoid causing a fuss. They didn't realize they were now dealing with a woman who assessed risk for a living. And for the first time in my life, I was looking at my family and seeing them not as blood relations, but as a liability that needed to be mitigated. The condo was not just an apartment anymore. It was the line in the sand, and they had just crossed it. The closing disclosure is a beautiful document if you know how to read it. To most people, it is just a wall of numbers and legal jargon, a final hurdle before they get the keys to their new life. To me, it was a map. It showed exactly where every penny went, from the origination charges to the government recording fees. I sat in that conference room at Harbor Point Title 3 weeks ago, my pen hovering over the signature line, and I felt a profound sense of calm. I had done this the right way. I had saved for 7 years, putting away 20% of every paycheck into a high-yield savings account that I nicknamed the Fortress. My credit score was 815. I did not need a cosigner. I did not need a gift letter from my parents. When the loan officer had asked about the source of my down payment, I simply sent over my bank statements. There were no unexplained deposits, no sudden influxes of cash, just a steady, boring accumulation of capital. When the closing agent, a woman named Sarah, asked if I wanted to purchase an owner's title insurance policy, I didn't hesitate. Yes, I said. The enhanced policy, please. Sarah had looked up, surprised. Most people try to skip that to save a few $100s. They think the lender's policy covers them. I work in risk management, I told her. I know that the lender's policy protects the bank's investment, not my equity. If someone comes out of the woodwork claiming they have an heirs interest or a lien from 10 years ago, I want to be covered. I remember saying that so casually. I was thinking about some hypothetical contractor who hadn't been paid by the previous owner, or perhaps a long-lost ex-spouse of the seller. I was thinking about strangers. The idea that the person I needed protection from might share my last name never even crossed my mind. I got the keys that afternoon. The condo was in the South End, right where the old industrial district was being converted into something livable. It was Unit 402. It wasn't a penthouse, and it wasn't a mansion. It was 900 square feet of white oak floors and exposed ductwork. I spent the first weekend just existing in the space. I didn't buy a lot of furniture. I brought my gray sectional sofa, a standing desk, and 3 large fiddle-leaf fig trees that I had managed to keep alive for 4 years. I set up my workspace in the corner by the floor-to-ceiling window. From there, I could see the Blue Line light rail train gliding past every 15 minutes. It wasn't a quiet view, but it was rhythmic. It was the sound of the city moving, of people going to work. It was the sound of independence. I made a cup of coffee that Sunday morning and stood by the window, looking out at the skyline. I felt a physical lightness in my chest, a decompression I hadn't realized I needed. This was mine. If I wanted to paint the walls black, I could. If I wanted to sit in silence for 12 hours, nobody would barge in asking for a loan. I made a specific choice not to post about it. There was no new homeowner post on Facebook, no photo of the keys on Instagram. I knew my family's algorithm too well. Happiness, in the Stewart family, was treated as a surplus resource that needed to be redistributed to those in deficit, usually Graham. So, I kept it quiet. I told my friends, my coworkers, and the post office. But I made the mistake of telling my mother. I had to. It would have been impossible to hide a move forever. I called her 3 days after closing, keeping my voice casual. "Yeah, I moved into a smaller place closer to work," I said. "Just wanted to shorten the commute. It is nothing special. Just a condo." "Oh, Faith, that is wonderful," she had exclaimed. "You are so independent. I will tell your father." I should have known telling father meant telling the whole house. The interrogation began less than 24 hours later. It didn't start with a congratulations text from Graham. It started with a series of questions that felt less like brotherly interest and more like a data mining operation. "Where is it exactly?" he texted. "Which building, the one near the brewery or the one by the station?" I gave him the street name, keeping it vague. "Did you go with a fixed rate?" came the next text. "Rates are high right now. What did you lock in at 6% 7?" I stared at the phone. Why did he care about my interest rate? Graham didn't know the difference between an APR and a yield curve. "I got a decent rate," I replied. "I bought points down." "Who did the title work?" he asked. "Did you use a lawyer or just a title company?" That was the question that made me pause. It was too specific. Most people ask about the square footage or if there is a pool. Graham was asking about the back-end logistics, Harbor Point. I texted back, feeling a prickle of irritation. "Why just curious?" He wrote, "I am learning about real estate, thinking about getting my license." I rolled my eyes and put the phone down. Graham getting a real estate license was about as likely as me becoming an astronaut. It was just another one of his phases. Then came the phone call from Linda. "Faith, honey," she started, her voice dropping to that conspiratorial whisper she used when she was about to ask for something unreasonable. "I was talking to Graham. He is going through such a rough patch with his apartment complex. The management is awful, and the rent is just eating him alive." I tightened my grip on the phone. "That is too bad. Mom." "Well, I was thinking," she continued, picking up speed. "You have that new place. It is 2 bedrooms, right?" "1 bedroom," I lied. It was technically a 1-bedroom with a den, but I wasn't going to give her an inch. "Oh, well, even so, the living room is probably spacious. Graham is so tidy. Maybe he could just stay there for a few months. Just until he gets his credit score up. He could pay you a little something. It would help you with the mortgage. No, I said. The word was immediate and hard. Mom, I am 33 years old. I am not having a roommate, especially not Graham. He is your brother, she said, her tone shifting to offense. You have plenty of space. You are just being rigid. I am not being rigid. I am being an adult living in her own home. Graham needs to figure out his own lease. He is trying to rebuild, she cried. Why can't you ever just be on the team? I hung up. I was shaking, not with sadness, but with rage. The entitlement was suffocating. After that call, Graham's approach changed. The texts became a bizarre mix of aggression and victimhood. Mom said you said no. He texted at 2 a.m. That is fine. I don't need your charity. I am working on a big project anyway. Then, 6 hours later. Must be nice to have perfect credit. Some of us actually take risks in life. You just play it safe, and then I am happy for you. Really, enjoy the ivory tower. I ignored them. I told myself it was just noise. I told myself they were just jealous and that they would get over it. I was a compliance officer. I dealt with tangible threats, with red flags I could see on a spreadsheet. I didn't think to look for threats in the emotional outbursts of my insolvent brother. I underestimated how desperate he was, and how much my mother wanted to fix him. I thought the worst they could do was ruin my mood. I didn't think they would try to ruin my title. The first real crack in the facade didn't happen at the dinner table. It happened on a Tuesday evening, 3 days before the dinner, when I checked my mail. The condo building had a secure mail room in the lobby, a wall of brushed metal boxes. I unlocked box 402 and pulled out a small stack of envelopes. Most of it was the usual new resident spam coupons for pizza, flyers for internet service, but there was one envelope that stood out. It was from a lending institution I didn't recognize. It looked like standard pre-screened junk mail. The kind that says, "You are pre-approved" in bold letters. I almost threw it in the recycling bin, but my professional instinct kicked in. I always shredded credit offers. You don't just throw them away. I took it upstairs and ripped it open to check the details before shredding it. It was a letter thanking me for my recent inquiry regarding a home equity line of credit. I froze. I stood in my kitchen, the letter trembling in my hand. Dear Faith Stewart, it read, "Thank you for your interest in tapping into the equity of your home it listed my new address perfectly." But that wasn't possible. I hadn't inquired about a HELOC. I had owned the place for less than 3 weeks. I barely had any equity to tap into, other than my down payment. I scanned the letter, my eyes narrowing. Usually, these are just solicitations, but the wording was specific. Thank you for your inquiry. That implied an action. That implied someone had filled out a form. Then I saw the contact information at the bottom. Please call us to finalize your application. It said, we have attempted to reach you at the number provided 704-555-0198. I stared at the number. My area code was 704, but my number ended in 4322. The number on the paper, 555-0198, was not mine. It wasn't a random number, either. It looked familiar. I pulled out my phone and typed the number into the keypad, but I didn't hit dial. I just stared at it, trying to place it. It wasn't Graham's current number. It wasn't Mom's. Then I remembered. It was a Google Voice number. I remembered because Graham had used a similar setup years ago when he was dodging debt collectors. He would cycle through burner numbers to screen calls. A cold feeling washed over me. Starting at the back of my neck, why would a lender have an inquiry from Faith Stewart attached to a phone number that wasn't mine? I looked at the date on the letter. It was dated 4 days ago. 4 days ago was right after I had given Graham the name of the title company, right after he had asked about my interest rate. My mind raced. To apply for a HELOC, you need more than just a name and address. You need a social security number. You need income information. I sat down on my gray sectional, the one I had bought to celebrate my independence. The view of the city suddenly looked different. The glass didn't feel like a window to the world anymore. It felt like the wall of a fishbowl. No, I thought, he wouldn't. He was lazy. He was entitled. He was a narcissist. But fraud identity theft, that was a felony. That was prison time. Graham was too cowardly for prison, but the number on the page didn't lie. Someone was using my name to ask questions about my equity. I didn't call the police right then. I didn't call the lender. I did what I always did. I gathered data. I put the letter in a file folder. I logged into my credit monitoring service. I started watching. I thought I was preparing for a confrontation about a credit inquiry. I thought I was going to catch him trying to open a credit card in my name. I had no idea that the credit inquiry was just the tip of the iceberg. I had no idea that while I was worrying about a loan, he was already working on taking the whole house. I looked at the sold date on my calendar. It had been the proudest day of my life. Now, looking at that letter, I realized it was just the day the target had been painted on my back. The week leading up to the dinner wasn't silent. It was filled with a low-frequency hum of desperation that only someone who grew up in the Stewart household would recognize. It was the sound of Graham running out of runway. I didn't need a private investigator to know that my brother was drowning. I could see the signs in the periphery of my life. I saw his car, a flashy leased sedan, parked 3 blocks away from Mom's house when I stopped by for coffee, presumably to hide it from the repossession agents who scan license plates in driveways. I heard the tight, frantic edge in his voice when he answered the phone. The way he would snap, "What?" before realizing it was just me. His credit cards were undoubtedly maxed out, his utilization rate likely hovering near 100%, dragging his score down into the sub-500 range. He needed a lifeline. He needed a large infusion of capital, and he needed it yesterday. And then there was Linda. My mother ramped up her campaign of emotional erosion with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. "Family has to stick together. Faith," she told me over the phone on a Tuesday, her voice thick with that weaponized martyrdom she had perfected. "You are so blessed. You have your salary. You have your health. Graham is struggling so much. It hurts me to see you doing so well while he is suffering. It feels unbalanced." "I work 60 hours a week, Mom," I replied, typing an email while I held the phone to my ear. "It is not luck. It is labor." I know, she sighed. "But you can't take money to the grave. Faith, relationships are what matter. Sometimes I think you care more about your bank account than your own blood." That stung, as it was intended to, but I held my ground. I didn't offer money. I didn't offer a loan. I just let the silence stretch until she hung up. 2 days later, Graham texted me, "Hey, I am in the neighborhood. Can I swing by and see the place Mom says it is nice? I promise I won't stay long." I hesitated. My instinct screamed no. My instinct told me to lock the deadbolt and pretend I wasn't home. But he was my brother. We had shared a bunk bed when we were toddlers. We had ridden bikes together. The conditioning to be a good sister was a deep groove in my brain, hard to jump out of. "Fine," I texted back. "I have 20 minutes before a conference call." When he arrived, he didn't bring a housewarming gift. He didn't bring a bottle of wine or a plant. He brought a clipboard. It was subtle, tucked under his arm. But I saw it. He walked in, his eyes scanning the space not with appreciation, but with assessment. He didn't look at my view of the city. He looked at the floors. He tapped the quartz countertop with his knuckle. "Nice," he said, nodding. "Is this engineered hardwood or solid?" "Engineered," I said, standing by the door, my arms crossed. "Graham, what are you doing?" He ignored me. He walked into the bedroom. I followed him, feeling like a stranger in my own home. He stood in the center of the room and looked at the closet. "You could fit a king bed in here if you moved the dresser," he muttered, almost to himself. Then he looked at the windows. "Good light, photogenic. I have a queen bed. Graham, I don't need a king." He turned to me. That charming smile plastered on his face, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just thinking out loud. Faith, maximizing the potential. This place has a lot of utility." He left exactly 20 minutes later. As he walked out the door, I saw him pause in the hallway. He looked up at the ceiling, checking the placement of the fire sprinklers, then glanced at the keypad on my door. It felt invasive, like he was casing the joint, because he was. The weirdness started the next day. I came home from work to find a package from Amazon sitting on my kitchen counter. I had brought it up from the mailroom, but when I looked closely, I realized the tape had been slit open and then pressed back down. I frowned. Maybe I had done it without thinking, no. I grabbed a knife to open it properly. Inside were the cleaning supplies I had ordered, but the packing slip was missing. That evening, my phone pinged with an alert from the Ring doorbell I had installed against HOA regulations, but I didn't care on my front door. Motion detected. I opened the app. The video feed showed the hallway. There was Graham. He wasn't knocking. He was just standing there, holding his phone up as if he were taking a picture of my door number. He stood there for a full minute, typing something into his phone, and then walked away toward the elevators. My stomach turned over. What was he doing? I decided to call the property management office the next morning. I needed to know if there had been any weird activity in the building. "Hi, this is Faith Stewart in Unit 402, I said when the manager, a brisk woman named Karen, picked up. I know this sounds strange, but has anyone been asking about my unit, or have there been any issues with the mailroom? There was a pause on the line. Ms. Stewart. Oh, I'm glad you called. I actually have a note here to contact you. My grip tightened on the phone. Why? Well, we had a gentleman call yesterday regarding Unit 402. Karen said. He identified himself as the co-owner. He wanted to clarify our bylaws regarding short-term rentals. Specifically, he wanted to know if we allow weekend listings on platforms like Airbnb. The air left my lungs. Co-owner? I choked out. Yes, a Mr. Stewart. He said he was your partner on the deed. I told him that our building has a strict minimum lease term of 6 months, and absolutely no short-term rentals are permitted. He seemed quite agitated by that news. He asked if there were loopholes for corporate housing. I closed my eyes. It all made sense. The clipboard, the comment about the king bed, the photogenic light, the questions about the interest rate. Graham wasn't trying to live here. He was trying to turn my home into a hotel. He wanted to hijack my asset, use my credit to secure it, and then churn it for cash flow to pay off his gambling debts while I paid the mortgage. Karen, I said, my voice shaking. Listen to me very carefully. There is no co-owner. I am the sole owner. If that man calls again, or if he tries to enter the building, you are to call the police. Do you understand? Oh, Karen sounded flustered. I see. I will make a note of that immediately. I hung up and dialed Graham. I didn't care that I was at work. I didn't care that my boss was walking past my glass-walled office. He answered on the second ring. Hey, sis, what is up? You called my HOA, I said, my voice low and lethal. You told them you were the co-owner. You asked about Airbnb rules. Graham laughed. It was a dry, dismissive sound. Wow, you are paranoid. Who told you that I didn't say co-owner? I said I was your brother. I was just asking for you. I know you're busy, and I thought maybe you'd want to make some extra cash on the weekends when you go visit Mom. I was doing you a favor. I never said I wanted to rent it out. I live there, Graham. And don't lie to me. The manager said you identified yourself as a partner on the deed. She misheard me, Graham said smoothly. You know how people are. They hear what they want to hear. You really need to relax. Faith, you are so high-strung lately. It is just a question. Why are you acting like I committed a murder? Stay away from my building, I hissed. I saw you on the camera. I was dropping off a letter for you, he countered, but I forgot it in the car. Jesus, Faith, you are impossible to be nice to. He hung up on me. I sat there, staring at my phone, vibrating with frustration. He was gaslighting me. He was rewriting reality in real time, making me sound like the crazy one for reacting to his intrusion. I needed to talk to Mom. Surely she would see this. Surely she would understand that he was crossing a line. I called Linda that evening. I was pacing my living room, the city lights blurring through the window. Mom, you have to talk to him, I said, trying to keep the hysteria out of my voice. He is calling my building management. He is pretending to own my apartment. He is trying to set up an Airbnb business in the home I live in. Oh, Faith, Linda sighed. You are blowing this out of proportion. Graham just has an entrepreneurial spirit. He sees potential. He was just trying to help you maximize your investment. It is not an investment property, it is my home. Well, it could be both, Linda said. He has such good ideas. If you just listen to him, you two could really build something together. I don't want to build anything with him. He's a financial disaster. Don't speak about your brother that way, Linda snapped. Then her voice softened, becoming hesitant. Look, Faith, I know you are protective, but we are just trying to fix things. I signed a few papers to help him get organized, to help him restructure his debts so he can stop worrying and focus on business. I stopped pacing. The room went dead silent. What papers? I asked. Oh, just some financial things, she mumbled. He brought them over. He said he needed a witness for some consolidation loan or something, and maybe something about assets. I didn't read all the fine print. You know I don't understand that legal talk. I just trust him. He is my son. A cold shiver went down my spine. It started at the base of my neck and radiated out to my fingertips. Mom, I whispered. Did you sign anything that had my name on it? I don't recall, she said defensively. There were a lot of pages. He said it was standard family restructuring. Just to show the bank we have combined strength. Combined strength. I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely type. I rushed to my laptop and opened the browser. I navigated to the Mecklenburg County Register of Deeds website. I knew the URL by heart. I used it every week for work. I typed in my name, Stewart. Faith. I hit search. Usually, there would just be the deed from my purchase 3 weeks ago. But today, there was a new entry at the top of the list. It wasn't a recorded deed yet. It was in the pending while unverified queue. Document type, quitclaim deed. Grantor Faith Stewart, grantee Graham Stewart, date filed. 2 days ago, I stared at the screen. The pixels seemed to burn into my retinas. My mother hadn't just signed a loan modification. She had likely notarized, or witnessed, or facilitated a document that stripped me of my ownership. She had signed away my home because Graham told her it was standard restructuring. I wasn't just dealing with a greedy brother anymore. I was dealing with a conspiracy. And the terrifying part was, they didn't even think they were stealing. They thought they were just rearranging the family furniture. But I wasn't furniture, and this wasn't their house. I took a screenshot, then I printed it, then I looked at the calendar. Dinner at Mom's house was in 2 days. Okay, I said to the empty room. You want to play legal games? Let's play. I clicked the download button on the county registrar's website, and for a few seconds, the spinning wheel on my laptop screen felt like the only thing moving in the entire world. My breath was shallow, caught somewhere between my throat and my lungs. When the PDF finally popped open, filling the screen with its stark, black and white legality, the reality of the situation hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was a general warranty deed, though the format looked slightly older, perhaps a template downloaded from a free legal website. The heading was bold and authoritative. Grantor Faith Stewart, grantee Graham Stewart. I scrolled down to the consideration line, the part of the document that states what was exchanged for the property, usually, in a legitimate sale. This would list the purchase price. Even in a family transfer, there is usually a statement of value for tax purposes. Here, it read, for the sum of $10 and other good and valuable consideration, $10. My brother had valued my life's work, my savings, my credit history, and my sanctuary at the price of a fast food lunch, but it was the bottom of the page that made my vision blur. There, above the printed line of my name, was a signature. It was Faith Stewart, to a layman, to a bank teller glancing at it, or even to my mother. It would look perfect. It had the loops in the right places. The F had the sharp upper point I always used. The T's were crossed with a slight upward slant, but I work in risk. I spend my days looking at patterns, and I know my own hand. I zoomed in until the pixels began to fragment. The stroke width was too even. When a person signs their name, there is a natural variation in pressure, heavy on the downstroke, lighter on the upstroke. This signature was uniform, flat. It lacked the microscopic tremors of a human hand moving across paper in real time. It looked like it had been traced, or perhaps lifted from another document via Photoshop and pasted onto this digital file before being printed and scanned again to hide the artifacts. And then, the final nail in the coffin, the notary stamp. To the left of the signature was the official seal of a notary public, State of North Carolina. County of Mecklenburg. Commission expires. November 2, 2025. The notary's name was listed as a Brenda H. Miller. I did not know a Brenda H. Miller. I had never stood in front of a Brenda H. Miller. I had never raised my right hand and sworn to the truth of this document in her presence. The realization washed over me, cold and absolute. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not Graham being aggressive or Mom being helpful. This was a felony. This was forgery, uttering a forged instrument, and filing a false public record. I closed my eyes for a brief second, allowing myself to feel the grief. The brother I had protected on the playground, the boy I had tutored in math, the man I had defended to my friends, he was gone. In his place was a criminal who viewed me as nothing more than an obstacle to his cash flow. I opened my eyes and picked up my phone. It was 8:15 in the morning. I didn't call Graham. I didn't call Mom. I called Harbor Point Title. When the receptionist answered, my voice was unrecognizable to my own ears. It was the voice I used in boardrooms when I had to deliver bad news to executives. It was devoid of emotion, stripped of all familial softness. This is Faith Stewart. I closed on a property with your agency 3 weeks ago. File number 89902. I need to speak to your legal department or your fraud claims specialist immediately. This is an emergency regarding an unauthorized deed recording. The receptionist must have heard the ice in my tone because she didn't ask for details. She transferred me instantly. A moment later, a woman picked up. This is Sarah Jenkins, Fraud Division. Ms. Jenkins, I said, staring at the forged signature on my screen. My name is Faith Stewart. I am looking at a document on the county registry that purports to transfer my property to a Graham Stewart. I did not sign this document. I did not authorize this transfer. I am initiating a formal fraud claim against my title insurance policy. There was the sound of typing on the other end, fast and rhythmic. Ms. Stewart, I am pulling up your file now. You are saying this is a total forgery. The signature is a simulation, I said, using the technical term. And the notary acknowledgement is false. I have never met the notary listed. I need you to flag this title immediately before any further encumbrances are recorded against it. Okay, Sarah said, her voice sharpening with professional focus. I see the recording. It hit the system 2 days ago. Ms. Stewart, I need to ask you a standard compliance question. Did you, at any point, sign a blank document, a power of attorney, or any paper that could have been altered? No, I said firmly. I have not signed anything related to this property since the closing table. And the grantee, Graham Stewart, what is his relationship to you? He is my brother, I said. The word tasted like ash. I see, Sarah said. The typing stopped. Unfortunately, familial fraud is common, but that makes it no less illegal. We are going to open a file. I will need you to sign an affidavit of forgery. We will also need to investigate the notary. If she notarized this without you present, she is liable. If her stamp was stolen or forged, that is another layer. Do whatever you have to do, I said. I want this stopped. We will place a deficiency flag on the title internally, Sarah explained. This alerts any other lender who uses a standard title search that there is a dispute. However, if he goes to a hard money lender who doesn't check thoroughly, he might still be able to borrow against it. We need to move fast. We hung up with a promise that she would email me the affidavit within the hour. I sat back, my heart rate finally slowing, replaced by a cold, calculating anger. I had pulled the legal lever. Now I needed to test the waters. I needed to see how far they were willing to lie. I opened my text thread with Graham. I see a deed was filed. I typed, "It says I gave you the condo. What is this?" I watched the 3 little dots appear almost instantly. He was on his phone. He was probably waiting for this. "Relax." His reply came through a minute later. "Don't make a big deal out of it. Mom agreed it was the best way to handle the asset protection. We can talk about it at dinner." Asset protection. He was using buzzwords he didn't understand to justify theft. I didn't sign it. Graham. I wrote back, "That is not my signature. It is a proxy signature." He replied, "Mom signed for you. She has implied power of attorney as the matriarch." Seriously. Faith, stop acting like a lawyer and act like a sister. It is done. I stared at the screen. Implied power of attorney as the matriarch. That wasn't a legal concept. That was a delusion. That was a phrase invented by a man who had never been told no in his entire life. Before I could type a response, my phone rang. It was Linda. I let it ring 3 times before answering. I needed to make sure my voice was steady. "Hello, Mother," I said. "Faith, why are you harassing your brother?" Her voice was high, pitched with anxiety. "He just texted me. He is so stressed out, and you are attacking him over paperwork. He forged my name." "Mom," I said, cutting through her noise. "He filed a legal document with the government saying I gave him my house, and he faked a notary stamp." "Oh, stop using those words," she snapped. "Forgery. Fake. You sound like a policeman. It is not forgery if it is family. I told him it was okay. I told him you would understand once you calmed down. It is just a temporary measure." "Temporary measure for what?" I asked. "Why does he need the deed, Mom?" "He needs to show assets," she stammered. "For his business, to get a line of credit for his new venture. He can't get the loan without collateral. We are just borrowing the equity for a few months. He will pay it back. He promised." "So he is taking a loan out on my house?" I asked, my voice rising. "He is putting a lien on my property." "He is going to service the debt," Linda cried. "He has a plan. Faith, why can't you trust him? I helped him with the paperwork because I knew you would be difficult. I knew you would let your selfish need for control get in the way of his success." "You helped him?" I asked quietly. "You mean you signed my name?" "I might have traced it," she admitted, her voice dropping to a whisper. "But I did it out of love. I did it to keep the peace, and the notary well. Graham knows a lady. It was just a favor." I felt a wave of nausea. My mother, the woman who taught me to say please and thank you, had traced my signature onto a deed to help her son rob me. She had become his accomplice, and in her twisted mind, she was the hero. She was the peacemaker. I was the villain for noticing. "Mom," I said, and my voice broke. Just for a second. "Do you realize that if he defaults on that loan, the bank takes my home? Do you realize I would be homeless?" "He won't default," she insisted. "He is your brother. He has defaulted on every loan he has ever had." I said, "And you have paid for all of them, but this time, you are paying with my house." "We will discuss this at dinner," she said, her tone turning imperious. "And I expect you to be supportive. Don't embarrass us in front of Kylie. This is a family matter." She hung up. I sat in the silence of my condo. The family matter, echoing in my ears. They had completely isolated me. In their narrative, I was the hysterical, selfish sister standing in the way of Graham's brilliance. They had reinforced each other's delusions until they became impenetrable armor. But armor has weak points, and delusions crumble when they hit hard. Documented facts. My email pinged. It was Sarah from Harbor Point Title. Ms. Stewart. The email read, "We have conducted a preliminary search based on your call. I have urgent news." I clicked the email open. The quitclaim deed was recorded 2 days ago. But this morning, at 9 a.m., a request for a payoff statement and a title binder was received from a lender called Rapid Cash Capital. This indicates that a hard money loan is in the final stages of underwriting. They are attempting to pull $150,000 of equity out of the property. Based on the speed of this lender, They could be looking to fund within 48 hours. I looked at the clock. It was not even noon. Graham wasn't just showing assets. He was cashing out. He was going to take $150,000, disappear into his business venture, and leave me with a lien that would force me into foreclosure. Sarah's email continued, "We are issuing a notice of fraud to Rapid Cash Capital immediately to stop the funding. However, we need you to formally execute the affidavit. I will call you in 24 hours to confirm the status. But for now, consider the title frozen." I leaned back in my chair. The trap was set. Graham didn't know I had called. He didn't know the title company was involved. He thought I was just texting and complaining. He thought he had Mom's permission, and therefore, he had God's permission. He was walking into that dinner thinking he was the owner of my condo. He had no idea that by the time he raised his glass for a toast, the ground beneath him would already be gone. I saved the email. I printed the affidavit. I looked at the view of the city one more time. "Okay," I whispered. "You want the house. Come and take it." I walked into the glass-walled lobby of Northbridge Risk Solutions at 7:30 the next morning. To the security guard, I was just Faith, the quiet woman who always arrived early, but inside my head, the switch had been flipped. I was no longer the aggrieved sister or the betrayed daughter. I was a senior compliance analyst, and I had a case file to build. My office was cool and silent. The hum of the server room, the only background noise. I sat down at my dual monitor setup and logged in. My job at Northbridge involved detecting synthetic fraud rings and bust-out schemes for mid-sized banks. I spent 40 hours a week looking at documents that were designed to lie. I knew that every forgery, no matter how skilled, left a digital debris field. You just had to know where to look. I opened the PDF of the quitclaim deed again. This time, I didn't look at the names. I looked at the structure. I opened the file in a metadata inspector tool we used for preliminary document verification. The data stripped away the visual image and showed me the bones of the file. The creation date was listed as 3 days ago at 10:45 in the evening. That was interesting. My mother went to bed at 9 sharp. Graham was the night owl. I zoomed in on the text body. The font for the legal description of the property. The part that listed the lot number and coordinates was Times New Roman, size 12. But the font for the grantee section, where Graham's name appeared, was slightly different. It was Times New Roman, but the kerning, the space between the letters, was tighter. I ran a quick image search for free North Carolina quitclaim deed template. The first result was a site called Legal Forms Now. I downloaded their sample. It matched my brother's document perfectly, down to the odd spacing in the footer. He hadn't even paid for a lawyer. He had downloaded a free PDF, filled it out on a computer, and printed it. Then I looked at the signature block. In my line of work, we look for pixelation halos. When you scan a signature from one document and paste it onto another, the compression algorithms often leave a faint gray fuzz around the ink strokes because the resolution doesn't match the background perfectly. I cranked the contrast up on my monitor. There it was, a faint, rectangular ghost box surrounding the word faith. My mother hadn't traced it, as she claimed, or maybe she had traced it, and then Graham had scanned it to make it look cleaner. Either way, it was a digital manipulation. It was a cut-and-paste job. I turned my attention to the notary. Brenda H. Miller. I logged into the North Carolina Secretary of State's Notary Public Search database. It is a public record, accessible to anyone, but most people don't know it exists. I typed in her name. Her commission status came up active, but I wasn't satisfied with that. I switched tabs to a subscription-based background check service Northbridge provided for due diligence. I typed in Brenda H. Miller and filtered for professional licenses. There were 2 red flags on her record. 3 years ago, a complaint had been filed against her for notarizing a vehicle title without the seller present. The complaint was settled, but the note remained caution advised regarding remote verification. I pulled up her business address. It wasn't an office. It was a residential address in a subdivision about 10 miles from my mother's house, a mobile notary. the kind who charges $50 to meet you at a Starbucks, or in this case, a dining room table. I created a timeline on my whiteboard, uncapping a red marker. Tuesday, October 14th, 10:45 p.m. Deed created on a computer. Metadata. Wednesday, October 15th, 9:00 a.m. Graham texts asking for title company info. 2:00 p.m. Faith Stewart's signature notarized by Brenda H. Miller. According to the stamp, 4:30 p.m. document electronically recorded with the county. I stared at the Wednesday, 2:00 p.m. slot. If I was going to prove fraud, I couldn't just say, I didn't do it. I had to prove I couldn't have done it. I needed an alibi that was ironclad. I logged into Northbridge's internal security system. We have strict badge-in, badge-out protocols because we handle sensitive financial data. I pulled my access logs for Wednesday, October 15th, 07:45 a.m. Badge in, main lobby, 12:15 p.m. Badge out, cafeteria, 12:45. Badge. In, turnstile, B, 06:30 p.m. Badge out, parking garage, at 2:05 p.m. The exact moment Brenda H. Miller claimed I was standing in front of her swearing to the truth of that deed. I was sitting in a risk assessment meeting in conference room B. I went a step further. I pulled the IP address logs from my workstation. My computer was active, sending emails and accessing the server, from 1 o'clock until 5 o'clock without a break. I printed the logs. I printed the badge report. I stapled them together. This was my shield. Physics was on my side. I could not be in two places at once, and unlike my brother, I had a corporate security system to vouch for me. But one question still nagged at me. The ID. To get a document notarized, even by a shady notary, you generally need to present a government-issued ID. If my mother had posed as me, she looks nothing like me. She is 60 years old with blonde hair. I am 33 with dark brunette hair. Even a negligent notary wouldn't mistake Linda for Faith. Unless they didn't use a physical person, unless they used a copy. I closed my eyes, letting my mind drift back through the last 6 months of interactions with Graham. He was always asking for things, money, rides, introductions. Then it hit me. 4 months ago, Graham had called me in a panic from the airport. Faith, you have to help me. I am at the rental car counter. I left my wallet at the house, and I have a client meeting in 2 hours. They said they can take a picture of a license if the last name matches, and I have a credit card on file. Can you just snap a pic of your license and text it to me? I will delete it right after. I had been in a meeting. I was distracted. I wanted him off the phone. Fine, I had said, but delete it. I had pulled my license out, snapped a photo of the front and back, and texted it to him. I opened my phone and scrolled back through our media history. It took a long time because Graham sent so many memes and GIFs to deflect from his failures. But there it was. 4 months ago. An image of my North Carolina driver's license. He hadn't deleted it. He likely printed a color copy. Or perhaps he just showed the digital image to the notary and gave her a sob story about, my sister is in the hospital, but here is her ID. She signed it already. If the notary was Brenda H. Miller, who already had a history of bending the rules, a $50 bill and a charming smile from Graham might have been enough to make her look the other way. I felt a cold burn in my stomach. He had harvested my identity months ago. He had just been waiting for an asset worth stealing. I turned back to the financial aspect, the rapid cash capital inquiry. I used my industry tools to look up the lender. They weren't a bank. They were a hard money lender, the kind that advertises no credit check and asset-based lending on late-night television. Their interest rates were likely in the double digits. They didn't care about the borrower's income. They only cared about the collateral. If the borrower defaulted, they would foreclose immediately. Graham wasn't trying to refinance to get a better rate. He was treating my condo like a giant ATM card. He was going to pull out every cent of equity, my down payment, the appreciation, everything, and walk away. When the payments became too much, which they inevitably would, He would just stop paying. Rapid Cash would take the condo. I would be left with nothing but a ruined credit score and a homeless existence. He wasn't borrowing the house. He was liquidating it. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was Sarah Jenkins from Harbor Point Title. I picked up immediately. "This is Faith." "Ms. Stewart." Sarah's voice was crisp. "I have an update. We have successfully contacted the underwriting department at Rapid Cash. We issued a stop funding notice based on a creditable claim of forgery." "Did they stop it?" I asked. "They have paused it," Sarah corrected. "But they are pushing back. They have a signed deed and a notary acknowledgement. They are saying their client, your brother, has provided a sworn statement that this is a legitimate family transfer. They are threatening to sue for tortious interference if we don't clear the title." "He gave a sworn statement?" I asked, incredulous. "He is doubling down." "He is Sarah said. "And since the deed is already recorded, the burden of proof is heavily on us. We need the affidavit of forgery notarized and returned to us today. And Ms. Stewart, we are going to need to make a formal police report. This can't just be a civil dispute anymore." "I am ready," I said. "I have proof he wasn't with me. I have badge logs showing I was at work when the deed was supposedly signed. I have the metadata showing the document was a template." "That is excellent," Sarah said. "That changes everything. If you have alibi evidence, we can crush the validity of the notary stamp." I looked at the calendar on my wall. Tonight was the dinner where Graham thought he was going to smooth everything over with a toast and a smile. "Sarah," I said, a plan forming in my mind. "I need you to do something for me, something unorthodox." "What is it?" "I am going to see my brother tonight. He thinks he has won. He thinks I am going to roll over to keep the family happy. I need you to call me at exactly 7:15 this evening." "Okay," Sarah said slowly. "To discuss the affidavit." "No," I said. "I want you to call me and verify the fraud status live. I want you to ask me the security questions. I want you to treat it like a formal investigation call, and I want you to tell me exactly what happens next with the police." "You want him to hear it," Sarah realized. "I want him to know that this isn't his sister being difficult," I said, my voice cold. "I want him to know that a federally regulated title insurance company is initiating a criminal fraud investigation. I want the room to hear it." There was a pause. "We don't usually participate in confrontations." "It is not a confrontation," I said. "It is verification. You need to verify I am not the one who signed. I will be available at 7:15 to provide that verification." Sarah was silent for a moment. Then I heard a small, sharp intake of breath. 7:15. "Ms. Stewart, I will have the fraud unit supervisor on the line as well." "Thank you," I said. I hung up. I looked at the stack of evidence on my desk. The badge logs, the IP reports, the screenshot of the forged deed, the timeline. I wasn't going to bring any of it to dinner. I didn't need to wave papers in his face. Graham would just call them fake. He would talk over me. He would gaslight Mom into thinking I printed them to frame him. No, I wasn't going to argue. I was going to let the system he tried to exploit be the one to crush him. He had used a fake notary and a stolen ID to enter a world of strict compliance and hard consequences. He thought he was playing a game of family politics. He didn't realize he had stepped onto a battlefield where I was the general. I packed my bag. I put on my coat. I checked my reflection in the monitor one last time. I didn't look tired. I looked ready. It was time to go to dinner. I arrived at my parents' house an hour before the scheduled dinner. I knew Graham would be late. Punctuality was a concept he felt didn't apply to him, much like credit limits or parking zones. This was my only window to get the truth before the performance began. The house smelled of roasting meat and lemon polish, the scent of my childhood. It was a comforting smell that now made my stomach turn. I found my mother in the kitchen, arranging deviled eggs on a platter. She looked up when I entered, her smile tight and anxious, the expression of a woman who knew she was walking on a minefield but was hoping if she stepped lightly enough, nothing would explode. "You are early," she said, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Graham isn't here yet." "I know," I said. I didn't hug her. I didn't put my purse down. I walked over to the kitchen island and placed a single folder on the granite countertop. I opened it. Inside was the printout of the quitclaim deed and the timeline I had constructed at my office. "Mom," I said, my voice quiet but steady, "I need you to look at this." She glanced at the paper and then immediately looked away, focusing intently on a speck of dust on the counter. "Faith, please, let's not start this before we even eat. Can't we just have a nice evening?" "We can't," I said, "because 2 days ago, a document was filed with the county that says I gave my home to Graham, and since I didn't sign it, and you told me on the phone that you helped him, I need to know exactly what happened." I tapped the paper where the signature Faith Stewart sat next to the notary seal. "What did you sign?" "Mom." Linda sighed. A long, ragged sound. She put the towel down and leaned against the counter, looking suddenly very old. "He was so frantic." "Faith," she said, her voice trembling. "He came over on Tuesday night. He was sweating. He said the investors needed proof of assets by the morning or the whole deal would fall through. He said it was just a provisional transfer. That is the word he used. Provisional." "And the signature?" I asked. "How did my name get on there?" She hesitated. "We went to that little shipping and printing store down on Exurban's strip mall, the one with the mailboxes. He had a stack of papers. He said he needed me to witness them, and then he said the forms required your signature to be on file for the restructuring." I felt a cold hand squeeze my heart. "So you signed it?" "I traced it," she whispered. "He had a copy of your birthday card from last year. He put it under the paper and held it up to the window glass so I could see the lines. He said it was fine, because I had your implied consent as your mother. He said you would be angry at first, but you would thank us later when he made $1 million. "And the notary?" I asked. "Brenda Miller." "She was just a woman at the counter," Linda said, waving her hand dismissively. "She didn't want to do it because you weren't there, but Graham, you know how he is. He turned on the charm. He told her you were in the car with a migraine and that this was just a formality between siblings. He slipped her $100 bill. She stamped it." I closed my eyes. It was so banal. My financial ruin wasn't plotted in a dark room by masterminds. It was executed in a strip mall shipping store with a $100 bribe and a window pane used as a tracing table. "Mom," I said, opening my eyes. "Do you understand what you did? You didn't just help him with paperwork. You committed forgery. You committed wire fraud. You conspired to falsify public records." "Stop it," she snapped, her eyes flashing with sudden tears. "Stop using those legal words. I am your mother. I was trying to save your brother." "From what?" I asked. "From the consequences of his own life. From drowning," she cried. "He has nothing. Faith, nothing. And you look at you. You have a career. You have savings. You have credit. You are so strong. You have always been the strong one. You can handle a little bump in the road. Graham creates cracks, but you are the concrete. You don't break." There it was. The core wound of my entire life, laid bare in the kitchen light. She didn't hate me. In her own twisted way, she admired me, but her admiration was a cage, because I was capable, I was expendable, because I could survive. I was expected to bleed so Graham could feed. "I am not concrete, Mom," I said, my voice shaking. "I am a person. I am 33 years old, and I am tired. I am not a wall for you to lean on when you are tired, and I am certainly not a wall for you to push over so Graham can walk across me." "He said you wouldn't sue," Linda said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He said, Faith will never take this to court. She hates conflict. She hates people knowing our business. She will just yell for a while and then she will fix it. She always fixes it. That hit me harder than the forgery. They were banking on my silence. They were weaponizing my desire for dignity against me. Graham had calculated that I would rather lose $300,000 than see my mother humiliated in a courtroom. "He is wrong," I said. "Faith, please," she begged. Reaching for my hand, I pulled back. "Don't make a scene. Think about what the aunts would say. Think about your father. If this gets out, the shame. The shame, I repeated. You are worried about the shame, Mom. Graham is trying to take out a hard money loan on my house. If I don't stop this, I lose the roof over my head. Do you think I care about what Aunt Carol thinks when I'm being evicted? He will pay it back, she insisted, retreating into her delusion. He won't, a voice said from the doorway. We both turned. My father, Roy, was standing there. He was wearing his gardening clothes, his hands stained with soil. He looked at Linda, and for the first time in my life, I saw something other than avoidance in his eyes. I saw horror. Roy, Linda said, her voice wavering. Tell her it is family business. My father walked into the kitchen. He looked at the folder on the counter. He looked at the quitclaim deed. I heard you, he said to Linda. I was in the mudroom. You traced her signature. It was for Graham, Linda pleaded. That is a felony. Linda, my father said. His voice was flat, heavy. I looked it up. Faith is right. That isn't family business. That is prison business. Don't be dramatic, Linda scoffed, though her hands were shaking violently now. I have let you coddle him, Roy said, looking at his wife with a mixture of pity and regret. I stayed out of it because I wanted peace. But this stealing Faith's house, that isn't peace, that is war. He turned to me. Faith, did you really call the title company? Yes, I said. And the insurance company, and the fraud department, Linda gasped, covering her mouth. You didn't. I did, I said. Because if I didn't, I would be liable for the loan Graham is trying to take out. I had to protect myself because you wouldn't. You are going to send your mother to jail, Linda whispered, her eyes wide with shock. You would really do that. I am not sending anyone anywhere, I said, feeling a cold calm settle over me. The truth is doing that. You signed the paper. Mom, you chose to pick up the pen. Graham said, she started, but I cut her off. Graham lied to you, I said. He told you I wouldn't fight back. He told you it was restructuring. He told you it was legal. He used you as a human shield because he knew you loved him too much to ask questions. And now, he is going to walk into this house, sit down at that table, and expect me to smile while he eats the food you cooked, knowing he stole my home. He loves you, Linda sobbed. He just wants to be successful like you. He doesn't want to be like me, I said. He wants to be me. He wants my credit, my assets, my stability, but he doesn't want the work. He just wants the harvest. I looked at the clock on the microwave. It was 6:50. Graham would be here any minute. I closed the folder. I am not going to argue with you anymore, Mom, I said, and I am not going to leave. I am going to sit at that table. I am going to eat dinner, and when Graham brings it up, and we both know he will, I am going to let him speak. But I'm telling you now, whatever happens tonight, whatever phone calls come through, whatever truths come out, you did this. You broke the seal on this family, not me. Linda looked at me, and I saw the realization dawning on her. She looked at the daughter she thought was a wall, and she saw a fortress that had pulled up the drawbridge. Roy, she said, turning to my father for support. My father shook his head. He walked over to the sink and began scrubbing the dirt off his hands. Set the table, Linda, he said without looking at her. Faith is staying for dinner. I picked up the folder and walked into the dining room. I sat in my usual spot, the one facing the window. I checked my phone. It was 6:55. Sarah from the title company would call in 20 minutes. I placed my phone on the table, face down, right next to my fork. The black screen reflected the chandelier above, a dark mirror waiting to show us who we really were. I wasn't the good daughter anymore. I was the witness for the prosecution, and court was about to be in session. The text message I sent to Graham at 10 o'clock that morning was a masterpiece of corporate neutrality. It read, "Come over for dinner tonight. We need to finalize the details regarding the house transfer. I want to make sure we are all on the same page before the bank gets involved." To Graham, that text sounded like surrender. To me, it was a subpoena. He replied within 30 seconds with a thumbs-up emoji and a text that said, "Glad you finally came to your senses. See you at 7. I spent the rest of the day turning my dining room into a trap. I didn't set physical snares. Of course, I set legal ones. I had already scanned and emailed the signed affidavit of forgery to Sarah at Harbor Point Title. I had retained a real estate litigation attorney named Marcus, who had advised me to get Graham to admit to the act in front of witnesses if possible, or at least to lock him into a version of events that could be demonstrably proven false. I printed out the badge-in logs from my office. I printed out the IP address report. I printed out the Google Maps timeline from my phone, which tracked my location via GPS. I put all of these into a sleek black presentation folder and placed it on the sideboard, right next to the wine bottles. At 6:55, I sat down at the head of my own table. This was a power move. Usually, when we ate at Mom's, Dad sat at the head, but this was my condo, my table, and tonight, my rules. My parents arrived first. Linda looked like she was walking to the gallows. Her face was pale, her makeup slightly smeared as if she had been crying in the car. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She clutched her purse to her chest like a shield. Roy walked in behind her, his face grim. He gave me a curt nod, a look that said, "Do what you have to do." He knew I wasn't backing down. He had seen the evidence in the kitchen, and for the first time in 30 years, he had decided not to look away. Then, at 7:10, the doorbell rang. Graham breezed in with Kylie in tow. He looked victorious. He was wearing a blazer over a t-shirt, his version of business casual, and he carried a bottle of champagne. "Celebration time," he announced, placing the bottle on the table with a thud. I knew we could work this out like adults. He looked around the condo, nodding approvingly. "You know, once we get the equity out, we should really look into upgrading these countertops. Granite is out. Quartz is in. I can get a contractor in here next week." I watched him. It was fascinating, in a morbid way. He genuinely believed the lie. He believed that because he wanted it, it was his. He believed that my role in the universe was to facilitate his desires. "Sit down, Graham," I said. My voice was calm, devoid of the shrill emotion he usually provoked in me. He pulled out a chair and sat to my right. Kylie sat next to him, looking nervous. She sensed the tension that Graham was too arrogant to feel. Linda sat opposite him, staring at her empty plate. "So," Graham said, rubbing his hands together, "Mom told me you were freaking out a little bit about the paperwork. Totally normal. Big numbers can be scary, but I have the plan all mapped out. Rapid Cash is ready to wire the funds as soon as the title clears the flag. We just need to remove whatever hold you put on it." "I want to hear the plan," I said, pouring myself a glass of water. "I want to understand exactly how this happened, just so I'm clear." Graham smiled, a benevolent, brotherly smile. "It is simple. Faith, I take the equity, I fund the consulting firm, I pay off the high-interest debt, and then I service the new loan. The condo stays in the family name. You still get to live here. Nothing changes for you, except you are helping your brother build an empire." "Nothing changes," I repeated, "except I don't own it anymore." "Details," he waved a hand. "We transfer it back in 2 years, or 5, whenever the market is right." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "I am curious about the deed. Graham, I pulled a copy from the county website." Linda flinched. She picked up her water glass, her hand trembling so hard the ice cubes clinked against the glass. "Oh, right," Graham said, not noticing Mom's panic. "Standard quitclaim. Mom helped facilitate it." "It has my signature on it," I said, "and it has a notary stamp." "Yeah, well," Graham shrugged. "We had to expedite things. You were busy at work. Mom acted as your proxy. It is a common thing in families." "But the notary," I said, keeping my voice soft, innocent. "The notary states that I appeared before her, that I raised my right hand and acknowledged the signature." Graham took a sip of the wine I hadn't poured for him. He poured it himself. Right. Well, we smoothed that over. Brenda is a friend. She knows us. She knows you are good for it. So I wasn't there? I asked. This was the trap. Graham paused. He looked at me, then he looked at Kylie, then at Mom. He must have sensed a trap, because he pivoted. He decided to rewrite history to make himself look more legitimate in front of his girlfriend. No, you were there, Graham said suddenly. Don't you remember? We met at the UPS store on Tuesday. You came during your lunch break. You were in a rush. Remember you signed it? Brenda stamped it, and you ran back to the office. You were complaining about your boss. The room went dead silent. Linda made a small, choking sound. She looked at Graham with wide, terrified eyes. She knew he was lying. She knew she had been the one to trace the signature, but Graham, in his arrogance, thought that claiming I was there made the deed more solid. He thought if he gaslit me hard enough in front of witnesses, I would doubt my own memory, or at least be too embarrassed to argue. I was there, I asked. On Tuesday. Yes, Graham said, gaining confidence. Tuesday at noon. You were wearing that blue suit, the one you wore to Dad's retirement party? And I signed it. With your own hand. Graham lied, looking me dead in the eye. I watched you do it, Kylie. I told you about it. Right, I told you Faith met me to sign the papers. Kylie looked down. I think so. See? Graham spread his hands. Everyone knows. So why are we doing this interrogation? Faith. You signed it? You agreed? Now you are getting cold feet because the reality is setting in. But it is too late. It is filed. I looked at my father. Roy was staring at his son with an expression of absolute disgust. He had just watched his son invent a reality out of thin air. I looked at Linda. She was weeping silently, tears tracking through her foundation. She knew that by lying, Graham had just thrown her under the bus. If he claimed I was there, he was denying her proxy story. He was making it a direct lie about my physical presence. Tuesday at noon, I repeated. At the UPS store. Yes, Graham said, annoyed now. Stop asking. I glanced at the digital clock on the oven. It was 7:14. That is interesting, I said, because on Tuesday at noon, I was in a compliance audit meeting on the 12th floor of the Northbridge building. I have 5 witnesses, a security badge log, and a video recording of me presenting a slide deck at exactly 12:15. Graham rolled his eyes. You are confused. Maybe it was Monday. Who cares about the day? The notary log cares, I said, and the law cares. You just lied. Graham, you just told a room full of people that I signed a document that I never touched. You just admitted to fabricating a legal event. Oh my God. Faith. Graham slammed his hand on the table. Enough. You are so petty. Who cares if you were there or not? The intent was there. Mom said you wanted to help. Why are you trying to trap me on technicalities? Because it is not a technicality, I said. It is a felony. It is family. He shouted. It is my house too. I deserve a chance. You have everything given to you. You sit in that office and judge people while I am out here hustling. I took what I needed because you were too selfish to give it. That is the truth. You took what you needed, I repeated. So you admit you took it without my consent. I admitted I did what had to be done, Graham yelled. And you aren't going to do anything about it, because you won't send your own mother to jail, because you are weak. Faith, you always have been. I looked at the phone on the table. It was 7:15. On cue, the screen lit up. The vibration hummed against the wood table, a low, ominous sound. Caller ID, Harbor Point title. Legal debt? Graham stopped shouting. He looked at the phone. He looked at the caller ID. Who is that? He asked, his voice dropping. Answer it, I said. Or I will. He didn't move. He looked like a deer in the headlights. I reached out and tapped the green button. Then I tapped the speaker icon. This is Faith Stewart, I said clearly. The voice that filled the room was not the warm, customer service voice of a receptionist. It was the sharp, authoritative voice of Sarah Jenkins. and I could hear the echo of a conference room behind her. "Ms. Stewart, this is Sarah Jenkins from Harbor Point. I have Director Vance from the Fraud Unit on the line, as well as the Special Investigator from the Mecklenburg County Register of Deeds." Graham's face went the color of old ash. "We are calling to verify the status of the affidavit you submitted this afternoon," Sarah continued. "We have reviewed the badge logs and the signature analysis. We are preparing to file a formal motion to vacate the deed based on criminal fraud. However, before we escalate this to the district attorney's office, we need to ask you one final question for the record." The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. "Go ahead," I said. "Is there anyone in the room with you who claims to have witnessed you sign that deed?" Sarah asked. "Because the notary, Ms. Miller, has just been contacted by law enforcement, and she is currently claiming she was coerced by a male subject to stamp a pre-signed document." Graham made a noise. It was a high, thin sound, like air escaping a balloon. "No," I said, looking straight at my brother. "There is no one here who witnessed that. In fact, the person who filed the deed just admitted, in front of 3 witnesses, that he took what he needed. He admitted to the theft." "Understood," Sarah said. "We are locking the file. The police report number is being generated as we speak. We advise you to secure the premises. Do you feel safe, Ms. Stewart?" I looked at Graham. He wasn't a threat anymore. He was a collapsing star. He was shrinking in his chair, his arrogance evaporating, leaving behind only the terrified, spoiled child he had always been. "Yes," I said, "I am safe. But I don't think my guests will be staying for dinner." I hung up the phone. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. It was the sound of a reality crashing down, smashing the delusions of a lifetime into dust. I picked up my fork and looked at my brother. "You said you deserved a chance, Graham," I said softly. "You just got one. You have the chance to leave my house before the police arrive. I suggest you take it." The silence in the dining room following my termination of the call was not the peaceful silence of resolution. It was the vacuum that precedes a shockwave. Graham sat frozen, his hand halfway to his wine glass, his face a mask of pale, sweating disbelief. He looked like a man who had been playing poker with Monopoly money, only to realize his opponent was betting with real bullets. I had hung up the phone to make a point, to let the threat of the police report hang over the table like a guillotine blade. But the universe, it seemed, was not done with Graham Stewart. Before anyone could speak, before Linda could launch into her inevitable weeping defense. My phone buzzed again. It was not a text. It was another call. The screen lit up with the same terrifying identifier, Harbor Point Title Fraud Unit. I didn't pick it up immediately. I let it ring. Once, twice. The sound was loud and jarring in the quiet condo. "You should answer that," I said to Graham, my voice devoid of any warmth. "I think they have more questions for the borrower." "I am not answering your phone," Graham hissed. Though his voice lacked its usual bite, he looked at the device as if it were a bomb. I tapped the speaker button again. "Ms. Stewart." It was Sarah Jenkins again, but this time her voice was joined by a deeper, more resonant male voice on the line. "I have Director Vance here. We need to clarify one specific detail regarding the active lien attempt before we transmit the file to the authorities." "I am here," I said, "and the room is listening." "Ms. Stewart?" The male voice, Director Vance, spoke up. His tone was not customer service. It was pure law enforcement. "We are looking at the application for the home equity line of credit that was submitted in conjunction with the quitclaim deed. The lender, Rapid Cash, has forwarded us the origination packet." I saw Graham flinch. He knew what was in that packet. "Go ahead," I said. "We need you to confirm for the record," Vance continued, "that you did not authorize the use of the email address gstewartventures86@gmail.com for official correspondence regarding this property." All eyes turned to Graham. That was his primary email address. It was the one he used for his fantasy football leagues. his failed dropshipping accounts, and apparently, for committing mortgage fraud. No, I said clearly. I do not use that email. That belongs to my brother, Graham Stewart. Noted, Vance said. And the phone number ending in 198, is that a number you control? No, I said. That is a burner number my brother uses. That is what we suspected, Vance said. We have IP matching that shows the application was submitted from a device named Graham's MacBook Pro at 2:30 in the morning on Tuesday. That is a lie, Graham shouted. Unable to help himself, he leaped up from his chair. You can't prove that IP addresses are circumstantial. Sir? Vance's voice cut through the room like a knife. This is a recorded line on a federal fraud investigation. Anything you say is currently being logged. We have the MAC address of the device, we have the geolocation, and we have the digital signature which tracks back to your user profile. Graham slumped back down, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. It was a verbal agreement, Graham yelled at the phone, his desperation turning into hysteria. Faith agreed to it. She said I could use the equity. She is just backing out now because she is jealous. It is a civil dispute. You can't call the police for a civil dispute. Mr. Stewart, Vance said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously calm. We have a forged notary stamp. We have a stolen identity. We have a fraudulent loan application submitted across state lines via wire. That is not a civil dispute. That is bank fraud, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft. The mandatory minimum for wire fraud alone is 20 years. 20 years. The number hung in the air. My mother, Linda, let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. She looked at Graham, her eyes wide with a horror that finally pierced through her denial. She had thought she was helping him cheat a system, maybe bend a few rules. She didn't know she was helping him sign his life away. Graham, Linda whispered, her voice trembling. You told me it was legal. You said it was just restructuring. It is legal if she agrees, Graham shouted, turning on our mother. She is lying. Tell them. Mom, tell them Faith said it was okay. Linda looked at me. She saw the cold, hard wall of my face. She saw the evidence on the sideboard. Then she looked at her husband. Roy was standing up now. My father. The man who had spent 30 years hiding in his garage. The man who had let Linda run the show to avoid conflict, was vibrating with rage. His face was a dark, dangerous red. You used your sister's name, Roy said, his voice low and guttural. To borrow money. $150,000. It was an investment. Dad, Graham pleaded. I was going to double it in 6 months. I was going to pay it back before she even noticed. Before I noticed, I asked, you were going to steal 6 figures of equity from my home and hope I didn't notice a lien on my title. I had a plan, Graham insisted. And then, the twist happened. The one variable I hadn't accounted for. Kylie, who had been sitting in the terrified silence next to Graham, suddenly spoke up. Her voice was small, confused, and utterly devastating. But Graham, she said, pulling at his sleeve, if the house isn't yours, what happens to the rental money? The room went dead silent again. Even the breathing seemed to stop. I turned my head slowly to look at Kylie. What rental money? Kylie. Graham's eyes bulged. He tried to grab Kylie's hand to silence her. Kylie, shut up. Don't say anything. No, Kylie said, pulling her hand away. She looked scared, realizing she might be an accessory to something she didn't understand. Faith, he told me the condo was his. He said he bought it, and you were just the tenant moving out. He told me to list it on Vacastay. Vacastay, I repeated. Short-term rentals. Yes, Kylie said, tears welling in her eyes. We listed it 3 days ago. For the weekends. We already got a booking for next week. A corporate client. They paid $3,000 up front for a 10-day stay. $3,000, I repeated. Graham took the deposit, Kylie whispered. He said he needed it for the closing costs. I looked at Graham. He wasn't just stealing my equity. He was selling access to my home. He was taking money from strangers to let them sleep in my bed, use my shower, and live in my sanctuary. And he had already spent the cash. You rented out my apartment, I said. It wasn't a question. I was going to give you a cut, Graham yelled. Jesus, Faith, I was trying to generate revenue. That place sits empty all day while you are at work. It is a waste of assets. You sold a lease on a property you do not own, Director Vance said from the phone. That is another count of fraud. Theft by deception. Obtaining property by false pretenses. Get out, Roy said. He didn't shout it. He said it with a finality that cracked the foundation of our family. Dad, wait, Graham started. I said get out. Roy roared, slamming his fist onto the table so hard the silverware jumped. You are a thief, Graham. You stole from your sister, you lied to your mother, and you involved this girl. He pointed at Kylie. In a crime. Get out of this house before I call the police myself. You can't kick me out, Graham sneered, trying to regain some scrap of bravado. This is Mom's house. It is my house too, Roy said. And I am done. I am done paying for you. I am done covering for you. And I am done watching you bleed this family dry. Mom. Graham turned to Linda. Are you going to let him talk to me like that? Linda looked up. Her face was streaked with mascara. She looked at her son, really looked at him. Perhaps for the first time in decades, she didn't see the golden boy anymore. She saw the predator. She saw the man who had manipulated her into committing a felony. You lied to me, she whispered. You told me Faith knew. She did know. No, Linda shook her head. She didn't. I traced that signature, Graham, because you begged me, because you said it was life or death, and now the police are coming for me too. Graham scoffed. Nobody is going to jail. Mom, Faith is bluffing. She won't sue. At that exact moment, the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, insistent sound. Graham jumped. Who is that? I checked the time. 7:30? That, I said, standing up, is the only person I trust to handle this conversation from now on. I walked to the door. My legs felt heavy, but steady. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Standing there was Marcus, my attorney. He was a tall man with a calm demeanor and a briefcase that looked like it contained weapons-grade plutonium. Behind him stood a uniformed private process server. Ms. Stewart, Marcus said, nodding to me. I apologize for the interruption during dinner. Not at all, I said. Please, come in. I led them into the dining room. Graham looked at Marcus, then at the process server, and his face crumbled. Who are you? Graham demanded. My name is Marcus Thorne, the lawyer said calmly. I represent Faith Stewart. He signaled to the process server, who stepped forward and handed a thick stack of papers to Graham. Then he handed a separate, thinner stack to Linda. What is this? Graham asked, his voice shaking. That, Marcus said, is a cease and desist order regarding the property at the South End. It is also a temporary restraining order preventing you from entering the premises, contacting the HOA, or listing the property on any rental platforms. Included in the packet is a copy of the civil complaint we are filing tomorrow morning for quiet title, fraud, and conversion. Graham dropped the papers on the table. They scattered across the roast chicken. You sued me, he whispered, looking at me with betrayal. I am your brother. And that, Marcus continued, pointing to the phone that was still active on the table, is why we are also handing over our evidence packet to the district attorney, because family status does not grant immunity from federal banking statutes. Marcus turned to Linda. Mrs. Vaughn, you have been served as a named defendant in the civil suit due to your role in the notarization. However, my client has instructed me to hold your portion in abeyance pending your full cooperation with the investigation against Mr. Stewart. Linda covered her face with her hands and began to sob. This isn't a family argument anymore. Graham, I said, my voice cutting through the sound of my mother's crying. "I told you, I am not a wall, I am not a bank, and I am certainly not your doormat." "Director Vance," I said to the phone, "you have heard the admission of the unauthorized rental. You have the confirmation of the email. Do you have everything you need to proceed?" "We do, Ms. Stewart," Vance replied. "We are freezing the title officially. The loan from Rapid Cash is dead, and we will be contacting the local precinct to pick up the notary logs in the morning." "Thank you," I said. I tapped the red button and ended the call. The silence returned. But this time, it was the silence of a tomb. The family as we knew it, the one where Graham took and I gave, where Mom fixed and Dad hid, was dead. It lay on the table, cold and broken, right next to the champagne bottle Graham had brought to celebrate his theft. "I think," I said, looking at my brother, "you should probably leave now. Marcus tells me that violating a restraining order is an arrestable offense, and as of right now, you are in violation." Graham looked at me. Hate radiated from him, hot and pure, but under the hate was fear. Real, tangible fear. He looked at the lawyer. He looked at his father, who was still standing with clenched fists. He looked at Kylie, who was backing away from him as if he were contagious. He grabbed the stack of legal papers. He didn't say a word. He turned and walked out the door. The slam echoed through the condo, vibrating in the floorboards, but I didn't flinch. I just picked up my wine glass, which I still hadn't touched, and took a long, slow sip. The door slammed shut behind Graham, and the vibrations seemed to travel through the floorboards, up my legs, and into my chest. For a moment, the silence in the apartment was absolute. It was not the tense, suffocating silence of the dinner. It was the hollow, ringing silence that comes after an explosion. My lawyer, Marcus, packed his briefcase with the efficiency of a man who had seen this scene 1,000 times. He nodded to me, a silent acknowledgement that the tactical part of the evening was over, and the emotional cleanup was about to begin. He left quietly, taking the process server with him, leaving me alone with my parents in a room that smelled of cold roast chicken and burnt bridges. The aftermath of that night was not a single event, but a slow, grinding process of disentanglement. In the weeks that followed, I learned that reclaiming your life is not as simple as winning an argument. It is a procedural marathon. I worked closely with Sarah Jenkins at Harbor Point Title. We filed a quiet title action, a lawsuit specifically designed to remove any clouds on the deed. Because we had the evidence, the badge logs, the IP addresses, and the admissions made on the recorded line, the process moved faster than usual, but it still required signatures, affidavits, and hours on the phone. The investigation into the notary, Brenda Miller, was the linchpin. Once the police contacted her regarding the fraud report filed by Harbor Point, she did exactly what people like her always do. She turned on the person who paid her. She provided a sworn statement that she had never met me. She admitted that a man matching Graham's description had come to her home office, offered her cash, and assured her that his sister was just in the car, and had already signed the papers. She surrendered her notary logbook, which showed a messy, hasty entry that didn't match the sequential order of her other stamps. Her commission was suspended immediately, and she was facing criminal charges for falsifying public records. That statement was the silver bullet. It voided the deed entirely. Graham's world did not implode all at once. It eroded, piece by piece. Rapid Cash Capital, the hard money lender he had tried to defraud, did not take kindly to being lied to. They blacklisted him, obviously, but they also reported the attempt to the credit bureaus and federal regulators. The business he was trying to fund, which turned out to be a vague consulting LLC with no clients, was dead in the water. He wasn't in handcuffs yet, but he was in a prison of his own making. He was drowning in legal fees he couldn't pay, facing a civil suit from me, and dodging calls from an investigator at the district attorney's office. He had gambled his life on the assumption that I would be too nice to press the button. He never calculated the odds of what would happen if I actually did. But the hardest work wasn't legal, it was familial. That night, after the lawyer left, My mother sat at the dining table for a long time. She didn't cry. She just stared at the empty chair where her son had sat. The illusion she had curated for 38 years, the story that Graham was just unlucky and I was strong, had been shattered. She had been forced to see him not as a victim, but as a perpetrator, and worse, she had to face the fact that she had been his accomplice. "I didn't know," she whispered to the tablecloth. "I really didn't know he was renting it out." "It doesn't matter." "Mom," I said, standing by the window. "You knew he was taking the house. You thought that was okay." "I thought we were sharing," she pleaded, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I thought families shared." "Parasites share," I said brutally. "Families respect." She flinched as if I had slapped her, but then my father spoke. Roy had been standing by the kitchen island, his arms crossed, watching the scene with a heavy, mournful expression. He walked over to the table and placed a hand on Linda's shoulder. "We did this, Linda," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel. "Roy, don't," she sobbed. "We did," he insisted. "We taught him that he could take whatever he wanted, and we taught Faith that she had to let him." He looked at me then, and his eyes were filled with a profound shame. "I am sorry. Faith, I sat in my garage for 20 years while you raised yourself. I let your mother rewrite the rules because I didn't want to fight. I let him steal from you because I was too cowardly to be a father." It was the apology I had waited a lifetime to hear. It didn't fix the past. It didn't undo the years of neglect, but it acknowledged reality, and that was enough to start with. I set the boundaries the next day. They were hard, cold, and non-negotiable. I sent an email to both of my parents. I told them that I would not be paying a single cent of Graham's legal fees. I told them that if they gave him money to fight me, I would cut off contact with them entirely. I told them that I would not drop the lawsuit for the sake of peace. "Peace," I wrote to them, "is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of justice, and I will have justice." My mother tried to bargain. Of course, she sent texts about forgiveness. She left voicemails about how hard it was for Graham right now. I didn't block her, but I didn't reply. I let her sit in the discomfort. I realized that for decades, I had been absorbing her anxiety so she wouldn't have to feel it. Now, I simply let the anxiety bounce off me and return to its sender. The final step was reclaiming the physical space. I hired a locksmith to come out 3 days after the dinner. I didn't just rekey the locks. I installed a high-security electronic system with a camera log. As I watched the locksmith drill into the door frame, purging the old mechanism that Graham had thought he had a right to, I felt a physical weight lifting off my shoulders. I contacted the management of Vacastay and sent them the court order. They removed the listing within an hour and banned Graham's account for fraud. The corporate client he had booked showed up in the lobby 2 days later. Confused and angry, I wasn't there, but the concierge told me they were turned away. Graham had to refund their $3,000 out of his own pocket money I knew he didn't have. I spent the next weekend purging the apartment. I threw away the housewarming gift Graham had brought, that cheap bottle of champagne. I threw away the throw pillows my mother had bought me because they matched Graham's taste. I bought new sheets. I bought a new rug. I saged the place, not because I believe in ghosts, but because I believe in the power of ritual. I needed to smoke out the entitlement. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 1 month after the nightmare began, my phone rang. It was Sarah from Harbor Point Title. I was sitting at my desk in my home office, looking out at the city. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across the skyline. The light rail train was gliding by, a silent ribbon of light. "Ms. Stewart," Sarah said, "I have good news." I swiveled my chair around. "Tell me." "The judge signed the order this morning," she said. "The fraudulent deed has been vacated. The record is expunged. We have recorded a new confirmation deed in your name only. The cloud on the title is gone. The property is 100% yours, free and clear of any claims by your brother or his lenders." I let out a breath I felt I had been holding since that first dinner. "It is over," I asked. It is over, Sarah confirmed. And Ms. Stewart, the district attorney's investigator, asked for a copy of the final judgment. It looks like they are moving forward with the indictment against the notary and your brother. Thank you, Sarah, I said. Thank you for believing me. You had the receipts, she said with a smile in her voice. You saved yourself. I hung up the phone and sat in the silence. For the first time in my life, the silence wasn't waiting to be filled by someone else's needs. It wasn't a void, it was a presence. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of wine, a good Cabernet I had bought for myself. I walked to the window and looked out at Charlotte. I thought about Graham. He was somewhere in the city, likely blaming me for his downfall, spinning a new story where he was the victim of a vindictive sister. I thought about my mother, sitting in her house, realizing that her baby boy was a criminal. I felt a twinge of sadness, a phantom limb pain for the family I wished I had, but I didn't feel guilty. I realized then that revenge isn't about making the other person suffer. That is just sadism. True revenge is simply refusing to participate in their delusion. Revenge is taking the pen out of their hand and writing your own ending. Revenge is living a life so solid, so secure, and so authentic that their chaos can no longer touch you. Graham wanted my condo because he thought it would make him feel like a man. My mother wanted me to give it to him because she thought it would make her feel like a good mother. But the condo was just steel and glass and concrete. The real asset they were trying to steal was my compliance. They wanted my submission, and that was the one thing I took back that they could never touch again. I took a sip of wine. The city lights flickered on, one by one. 1,000 little victories against the dark. I was alone in my apartment. I had no boyfriend, no close family nearby, and a brother who would likely never speak to me again, and I had never felt more complete. I turned away from the window and looked at my living room. It was quiet, it was clean, and it was mine. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let me know. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help us share more stories like this with the world.